Elites throughout history have always tried to expand their power and set up empires. In the last 100 years, through the media, they've taught you that that doesn't exist, that there aren't powerful combines of men who want more power. Even though the UN, the IMF, the World Bank have all written literally thousands of white papers describing their entire program. I read those white papers, so I know their plan. Here's the deal. We already have a global government, but it's unelected, it's unaccountable, it wants nations to come to United Nations meetings and waive their rights and sign legally binding treaties with the IMF and World Bank to let the IMF and World Bank tax literally hundreds and hundreds of different facets of our lives. And that was in the final draft treaty to set up carbon taxes, to set up home inspections, to set up energy taxes, to set up taxes on all travel, on air traffic, to have a global UN-controlled system that carries this out. Now, as Lord Christopher Monckton said here Thursday on my weekday radio show, the only part they ever wanted to get, because the IMF and World Bank was already loaning money at 30% interest to the third world. They already control our countries through the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve. They just wanted countries to sign on to it. But that was just icing on the cake. The heart of what they wanted was to get the industrialized nations, China, the U.S., England, France, Germany, and others, and those are the groups that did sign on, to agree that a unelected board, and when I read the final treaty Friday that they agreed on, it was right there, have the treaty right here in my stack, that they would be able to just arbitrarily set up the taxing system. And so the countries did agree that this private unelected group at the IMF and World Bank that they will now set up, it's a blank check. It just says, do whatever you want, that they can now establish this. What came out today in the London Guardian, London Telegraph, Associated Press, I'll show you a document cam shot of this for prisonplanet.tv viewers. For radio listeners, just Google Copenhagen Climate Summit plan for EU to police countries' emissions. And as we told you, this is European Union expansion to run the world government. What did Herman van Rompuy, the head of the EU, say a month ago? He said that. That's what they got. Now, most of the third world countries refused. There's huge resistance in the U.S. Senate, but the banks don't care. They just say, well, we're saying it's a success, and we're saying as the private banks, we're going to set this up. So they're declaring victory. They're saying they've grabbed victory from the jaws of defeat. They haven't really done it. It did blow up in their face, but they're still declaring it, and Obama and Gordon Brown of the EU, he's also on the EU board, but British Prime Minister, and Van Rompuy and others, and Ban Ki-moon have gotten the industrialized nations to sign on to let the banks run this system. But they were already running it. So now they can go ahead and try to levy these taxes through the nations, but they weren't able to, again, have the nations sign on at the international level. So they're going to have to come into the national level and try to ram this through. But the Congress says they won't do it because it's so unpopular, and ClimateGate has exposed them. So Obama has said, quote, we will do it by command and control, whether Congress wants it or not, which is unconstitutional and is a high crime, as Senator Inhofe and others have said. So they're declaring the world government's here, but the world didn't sign on. Only a handful of first world nations did. The third world found out it was a scam to literally double carbon taxes on them so they could be fully controlled by the IMF and World Bank. But here is the London Telegraph today. Copenhagen Climate Summit, plan for EU to police countries' emissions. Gordon Brown is drawing up, because, see, it's a blank check agreement. Gordon Brown, see, he runs the G20. He's the real power. Plans for the European Union to become a global warming policeman, that's a quote, monitoring individual countries' compliance with carbon-cutting targets. So, see, they don't care if the majority of nations didn't sign on and they were defeated. They're just going to do it anyways because they're tyrants. Just like when England, their parliament won't sign on to the EU, but they're still under EU regulations and control. But our victory is we're forcing them to try to implement this now when they don't even have agreements from most of the countries. They literally had 191 nations there and got, 11 countries to sign on to it? And this was all done behind closed doors, so they were saying only 7 signed on, only 11 signed on. We don't even know who signed on. All we have is the treaty. And then Brown says, I will write it up. I will tell you what it is. How is that freedom? How is that global democracy? Quote, it's not. The plan emerged from the chaotic Copenhagen conference on climate change, which ended in acrimony and mistrust between world leaders. The summit was unable to reach a substantive deal on cutting greenhouse gases because of a row or fight over how countries would prove that they are honoring promises to cut their carbon emissions. China, in particular, objected to any external monitoring of its actions. So the countries wouldn't sign the treaty, but their executive officers, their presidents and prime ministers said, we don't care, just like we do with the Federal Reserve or the G20, we'll just implement by fiat. So there is the heart of it. They're going ahead with this, even though they didn't ratify it at the global level. And they're saying they're going to ram it through via the bureaucracies. Exactly what member of House of Lords, former advisor to Thatcher, an expert on this for more than 2 decades, Lord Monckton, said they would do Thursday. He is absolutely correct. And the hour-long interview with him in video is posted at Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com from Thursday. I suggest you go watch it because everything that guy says just continues to be verified. And that's what we believe was going to happen as well, but he added nuances to it that I didn't understand. This is all a learning process as we go along here. So that's what's going on that front. If you want to read the accord, you can also do that. We have a direct link to the United Nations with the accord that you can read for yourself. Continuing, ladies and gentlemen. In summation, on the 2-week United Nations meeting that the UN said, and Obama and Gordon Brown said, was the most important UN meeting in history. And it was. They attempted to go public with world government. They openly announced, David de Rothschild, all of them, on national television and from the UN dais, that this was the birth of world government. Here's the reality. World government was already established through fraud by the private IMF and World Bank, both holding companies and consortiums for the other holding companies, Bundesbank, Bank of England, Federal Reserve, and the private banks that make up those consortiums. And so they wanted to get the countries there, have them sign on, and the majority of countries didn't sign on and are on record saying they found out this was a eugenics fraud, a death sentence for millions of people a year on the edge of starvation, to cut off their food, to cut off their resources, which is what the United Nations says this is really all about themselves. But it's been a great learning experience for everyone because even though they couldn't pass it, Gordon Brown now says, oh, well, the agreement says that the industrialized countries are writing up agreements with the private banks to go ahead and levy taxes in our countries, the countries we can get to do it, piecemeal, and to start expanding the funding of this new private global government. And so the United States, England, China, and others are going to put money into the IMF and World Bank that they then go out and loan to third world countries. And they have stipulations that say you can only invest with this company. You can only buy this type of equipment. You have to make these types of cuts in your energy consumption to get this money, which is actually meant to shut down their industry, but is a payoff to the politicians in those Latin American, African, and Asian, and Eastern European countries so that they will make those cuts. It is a payoff. It is a globalist war chest for corporate interest to go in and buy off their competition. And again, I suggest everyone go to Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com in your spare time or when the show's over and watch that 10-minute, 45-second video I filed Friday that Aaron Dykes did a great job adding documents and news clips to everything I said so you can see it for yourself while I talk about it. And video clips of the world leaders saying exactly what I said they said. So you don't have to believe a word I say. It's all documented in that video. This video is key for people to understand. And then, 2 days after I released this video, Gordon Brown comes out and says he's writing the world government agreement. That countries are bound to. They write the agreement after the meeting because the country signed on, the few that did, those are the countries fully controlled by the private banks. All the legislation is like this now, either national, local, or international. Almost all the new anti-gun bills in Congress state that the Attorney General can ban any guns he wants. Doesn't mean they pass the bill. That's in the bill, though. Or the Attorney General can put you on a no-gun buy list, just like they can put you secretly on a no-fly list with no evidence, and you can't find out why you're on the list, and you can never face your accuser. Or the banker bailout bill of October 3rd, 2000 said unlimited trillions can be taken by the private Federal Reserve and given to themselves, and where the money goes is secret. These are blank check agreements.